All right, Muneeb Ali of Stacks, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start this way. Stacks has been through an interesting journey. You know, we talk a lot with these projects about progressive decentralization. We have been covering you for years and going from Blockstack to Stacks, and now you have this whole ecosystem. What is the latest for you guys? I mean, where do things stand in terms of how busy and vibrant the ecosystem has become? And what's next in terms of getting the kind of name out there with everyone figuring out all the things that are now hosted on Stacks?
Sure. So I think for people who are not familiar, Stacks is like smart contracts for Bitcoin. That's the core problem that we've been trying to solve for several years. And interestingly, the project was called Blockstack, and the company behind it was also called Blockstack. That could be confusing. So with the launch of the Mainnet that happened in January of this year, we effectively simplified the name of the project to just Stacks. And now there are a bunch of different companies behind it, right? So you can go and like find out about what each of these companies really do. But the idea really is you don't want any single big company kind of like, you know, that is primarily responsible for kind of like maintaining the network or something like that. So it's a truly decentralized network in the same sense that, you know, Bitcoin is decentralized. So it was launched by independent miners, and given that we are trying to bring smart contracts to Bitcoin, we have extreme focus on decentralization. We have extreme focus on kind of like building the ecosystem in a way that is not just like a company that is really doing everything in an open source way.
Well, and let's be specific about the tech. I mean, is this a separate blockchain? Is this built atop the Bitcoin blockchain? And of course, you say smart contracts on Bitcoin. A lot of people don't realize that's a thing. A lot of people frame it as there's Bitcoin over here and then smart contracts. You must be talking about either Ethereum or some other chain.
Yeah. So I think technically speaking, like think of that as a separate layer. You could think of that as a L1. I actually call it like a layer 1.5 because it's not a layer 2 like Lightning. Lightning is a strict layer 2. It's not an independent layer 1 like Ethereum or Solana because it depends on Bitcoin, it connects to Bitcoin. So I call it like a layer 1.5. And the reason to do that is if you try to build something like this strictly as a layer 2, then you're limited by the Bitcoin's scripting language, which is the problem that we are trying to solve, right? So we are trying to bring Ethereum like fully expressive smart contracts to the Bitcoin ecosystem. But to do that, you kind of like need to break free of the Bitcoin scripting language. So our Stacks layer has full smart contract features, and you can interact with these smart contracts through just Bitcoin transactions, right? So you can just send a Bitcoin transaction and can interact with a smart contract, and that's like when people have their aha moment. They're like, oh wow, like smart contracts are there for Bitcoin because you could trade your Bitcoin into NFTs, you can trade your Bitcoin into new types of assets. USDC announced that they're coming to the Stacks blockchain. So imagine how much trading happens between BTC and USDC on centralized exchanges. Now instead of doing that, you can send a pure Bitcoin transaction and do a native swap from Bitcoin into something like USDC, right? So that's the type of functionality that we can enable.
So there's that type of functionality, but you can build all sorts of DeFi applications using Stacks, right? And I think a lot of people would say, well, why go to that trouble? Why not just use Ethereum or there's Solana? There's all other sorts of smart contract-based platforms. Why go to all the trouble to put smart contracts on blockchains? And what are the advantages of that? And then what are the trade-offs?
Yes, I think it's a great question. So I'm a Bitcoiner. I started in the Bitcoin community in like 2013, and I view Bitcoin as like the best, most decentralized money layer. Right, so and a lot of the industry kind of like accepts that, right? Like Bitcoin is kind of like the best store of value. It is the asset that you want to hold, especially if things go south, right? Like right now we're in a bull market, but if you're talking about holding an asset over like really long time horizons, like 10 plus years, we don't even know if some of these other blockchains will be around like in 10 years or not. So if you have a really good store of value, we want to make Bitcoin programmable. So we want to effectively help deploy that Bitcoin into smart contracts, into all these applications. I was just on a panel with Bitco and the wrapped BTC people. I think it's a very interesting stat that 1% of Bitcoin is issued as a wrapped asset on Ethereum. That clearly means that there's demand for using Bitcoin in smart contracts. But what about the remaining 99%? Right? So we take the other side of the design space, that instead of trying to bring Bitcoin in a wrapped fashion to some smart contract chain, why don't you bring the smart contract functionality directly to Bitcoin? And that in that way, you can access some of these applications without going through custodial services, without kind of like moving your Bitcoin. Because for a lot of Bitcoiners, if you move your Bitcoin, quote unquote move, they don't even think of that as Bitcoin. They think of that as like something else, right? So for true Bitcoin DeFi or true Bitcoin applications, you need to give them an experience where they're actually interacting with Bitcoin, like literal Bitcoin on the Bitcoin chain. And those are the type of applications that Stacks enables.
So, and watching that panel, one of the things that came out was, I think James Prestwich of TBTC had said, what we found is that a lot of people don't really mind having their Bitcoin go through custodial channels. Mm-hmm. But you're telling me that for you, that's not really what you're in it for. Do you think that there's enough demand for people who want a product like Stacks?
Yes. So I think the way to think about this is there are obviously different kind of like market segments, right? Mm-hmm. So that comment was more about, hey, the end users sometimes don't care, mm-hmm. right? Like they just want to use a custodial service, and they might even feel safe. Right. There are definitely people who are like, hey, instead of my multi-sig wallet, like I feel safer using Coinbase.
Sure.
Right. There are definitely people like that out there. I feel like if you look at kind of like the heart of the Bitcoin community, like Bitcoin is almost like $1 trillion in asset. A lot of the type of people who get attracted to Bitcoin, the asset, are the folks who want to have self-custody, mm-hmm. or who don't feel comfortable, who are very risk averse, right? So let's take an example of a application where you can deposit your Bitcoin into a trusted third party and earn interest there. I think there is some sort of a natural cap to how many Bitcoin would that service actually attract, because at some point, like that service is becoming like a huge risk factor to the ecosystem, because it holds so much Bitcoin, and you're taking a counterparty risk by going through a provider like that. If you flip that, if you actually now have a smart contract where you can lend your Bitcoin and you have a collateral, so lending is happening literally on the Bitcoin chain, right? Through a multi-sig Bitcoin transaction, but now it's a smart contract with collateral. I think you have suddenly expanded the potential market, because a lot more people will be more comfortable if they're not taking a counterparty risk, and they actually don't worry about a company going bankrupt and their Bitcoin disappearing. Like the one thing that Bitcoiners don't want to do is lose their Bitcoin, right? and they would do anything to make sure that that's like rule number one. Right.
So Muneeb, I mean, when you say the term Bitcoin DeFi, even that right there kind of triggers some folks. I mean, we still have in this ecosystem Bitcoin maximalists, as they're called. It's a dirty word, but people who think, there's only Bitcoin and I don't want to hear about anything else. And now even Ethereum maxis too, who's saying, Ethereum went further than Bitcoin ever went, but is the future actually a multi-chain landscape? Are all these things going to be able to coexist and thrive? And of course, eventually, maybe a reduction in friction for the on-ramps?
Yeah, so I think that's like the $10 trillion question, right? Like not even $1 trillion question, because any chain that becomes kind of like the default place for a lot of these DeFi and NFT type applications is going to be worth a lot. And a lot of people are trying different types of, almost like if you look at it like a design space, people are exploring like a lot of different ideas. But here's the interesting part, right? If you squint your eyes a little bit, a lot of these layer 1 protocols are all proof of stake. They're all trying to optimize for really fast speeds and really quick finality. And they're kind of like giving a similar menu to the users, right? Whereas I think where Stacks really stands out is, it's not a proof of stake system. Interestingly, the main chain doesn't optimize for fast speeds. It actually optimizes for decentralization like Bitcoin does. Yes, there are other solutions like subnets where you can get the faster transaction times and so on. So interestingly, it's actually a very interesting design space that why build a separate ecosystem when there's already Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin already has $1 trillion in value, and just enable people to deploy that capital and build applications and grow the Bitcoin ecosystem. Obviously, people in the Ethereum world, they, in many ways, like that's their biggest criticism of Bitcoin, that it's like a rock and you can't do anything useful with it. But now that you can, and obviously this is relatively new, our mainnet just went live like 6 months ago, and developers are building all sorts of things now. So in many ways, it takes away the biggest argument against Bitcoin from the Ethereum world, right? And interestingly, the kind of stuff that even as you said, the Ethereum fans were criticizing some of the newer projects as, hey, you're more centralized than Ethereum, or you're more like whatever. Like Bitcoiners kind of like look at Ethereum that way. You're saying that this other project is more centralized, but we view you as centralized, right? So if you're playing this picture, and obviously no one has the perfect answers, I'm taking the bet that if this functionality can just come to Bitcoin, like that could be a potentially very, very large and very, very interesting market. I'm not saying that might be the only thing there. I think there's definitely space for a lot of other projects and blockchains, and they can get interconnected. But I do think that the design space of building around Bitcoin is severely underexplored in the industry right now. People are very quick to start their own proof of stake project instead of actually figuring out that what can be done with existing networks like Bitcoin.
So this sounds like multi-chain future, but not all chains are of equal importance or equal value.
Yes, so I know you use the term like Bitcoin maximus. I try to not use it. I know some people who get offended by it. I sometimes say like, Bitcoin purist or Bitcoin hardliner, but I'm trying to introduce a new term, right? And that term is Bitcoin centrist. So I consider myself a Bitcoin centrist. And that view of the world is that there's Bitcoin in the center, like that's the hard money, that's the money layer, but it's also the settlement layer for crypto. Right, so Stacks, for example, like if you do 1,000 transactions in a Stacks block, these transactions are settling on Bitcoin just like Lightning does, right? So Stacks is benefiting from the security of Bitcoin. So if you view this as like Bitcoin as center, Bitcoin is the store of value, and then everything is built around it. And there can be other blockchains as well that maybe connect to Bitcoin, but Bitcoin kind of like becomes the center of the universe, right? And that's the mental model that I have.
Bitcoin centrist. Well, let's close out this way. I mean, you're the perfect person to ask about this. Have to bring this up. You've had that interesting journey I referenced, working with, hand in hand with, the SEC. Often cited as the first and maybe still only example of a token sale, or ICO, that was done with the SEC's buy-in, and we're going to wait, we're going to take more time to do it, and we're going to do it right so we don't get shut down as an unregistered securities offering. And that was all kind of 2017, 2018. Now it's 2021, and it's kind of all happening again in terms of opaque guidelines. Crypto projects are scared. The SEC chair, Gary Gensler, suddenly does not look very friendly to crypto at all, even though people thought he'd be a friend to crypto. What do you think is going on? What do you think is going to happen next when it comes to regulation and the crypto space?
Yeah, so I think we did a SEC qualified offering in 2019, and obviously it was a long journey because you have to work on this new type of an offering, and finally getting the qualification was actually something that I think the industry celebrated a lot. They were like, okay, great, the regulators are willing to qualify token offerings, and it's like a fully compliant type of thing.
But then I didn't see that many others do it.
Yes, because there's a lot of overhead, right? Like not everyone had the type of capital that we had, and there are ongoing reporting requirements and overhead. It's not an easy thing to do, and I completely see that. Like if you're a founder, you might want to just block the US instead of going through the trouble of opening up the US market, right? So I can completely see why people would do that. And I think interestingly, the work that we have done on the regulation side actually comes from the same type of values that we have, even on the technology side, which is building for the long term. One of the biggest reasons for building on Bitcoin is we think, hey, Bitcoin is a thing that's going to be around 10 years from now, 20 years from now, so let's try to do that. So when you're thinking about a token offering, you could maybe take a little bit more risk and just do it, or you try to do it the hard way, where you try to get a SEC qualification so that at least the token offering is very clear that, okay, the token offering is clearly compliant. Right.
But so the projects have the patience for that.
Exactly, right? So I think we have kind of always taken that approach that we try to optimize for the long term, and obviously we're just sitting back and watching what's going to happen in the industry with the new administration and so on. But in many ways, if you go back to 2019, one of the reasons why we did the more compliant offering is because we were afraid that what happens if regulators down the road become hey, no, any offering is a security, and you should have complied with the securities regulations. We're like, well, we'll try to comply with the securities regulations up front.
Well, so those who've launched new tokens in the last year or two hear that, and that might be us, right? Sounds like there's not much comfort to give to them. You don't know what'll happen.
Yeah, I feel like it's like, I should just say that, I try to not comment on the regulations, like, for various reasons, because I don't want to rub anyone the wrong way. Like, I personally can see the frustration that a lot of the founders are feeling, right? That when they say that, hey, we don't have any clear guidelines, like, maybe there should be a safe harbor, maybe there should be this. Like, I see what they're saying. And at the same time, I do have experience working with the regulators, and I know the kind of stuff that they're concerned about, and I can see their side of the picture as well, that why are they concerned, and why are they doing what they're doing. And obviously with the new administration, they've definitely, like, taken it up a notch. Like, so there's definitely more scrutiny in our industry. I'm on a day-to-day basis, like, I try to focus more on the technology side of it, and try to not think too much about regulations.
You've been through it, so we'll see what happens once others go through it, either voluntarily or involuntarily. But really interesting stuff. Muneeb, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.